this story, we're talking cold weather and tents and tarps, like these ones, dotting sidewalks in downtown Portland. We've learned that in the past month, Multnomah County has handed out thousands of tarps and hundreds of tents to outreach workers to give to homeless people. Efforts the county chair calls life-saving. But there's a problem. Handing out that gear puts the city of Portland in potential violation of a legal settlement. And my emails to the city this morning had leaders scrambling. It's our big story tonight.
Well, I'm appalled that the county and the city cannot get their acts together and work cooperatively.
As the cold weather continues tonight, tension around life-saving gear for homeless people heats up. That man you just heard from is John DiLorenzo. He's the attorney behind the 2022 lawsuit against the city of Portland, arguing the city is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act for allowing tents and tarps to block access for people with disabilities on public sidewalks. The city agreed to a settlement in 2023. Part of that agreement is that the city nor its contractors hand out tents and tarps, except in limited circumstances, such as severe weather.
There has to be a severe weather declaration in order to justify handing out tents and tarps. And the reason is because the idea is to bring people inside, not enable them to stay outside.
Now, it wasn't until yesterday at 6 p.m. that Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega-Peterson declared the first cold weather state of emergency of the year. But since January 10th, the county has given outreach workers what the chair labels life-saving gear to then hand to homeless people. That gear includes, among other things, 4,220 tarps, 857 tents, 860 sleeping bags, and 4,380 blankets. Now, we know much of that ends up right back on the sidewalks of downtown Portland. DiLorenzo argues that puts the city in violation of that ADA settlement. Now, you may be thinking, why? It's not the city's fault. It's the county giving these supplies to outreach workers. Well, that's where things get sticky. Technically, according to DiLorenzo, Multnomah County is contracted by the city of Portland as part of the Intergovernmental Agreement, or IGA, between the city and the county-run Joint Office of Homeless Services. That's the group responsible for managing money meant to address the homeless crisis. The city sends around $30 million taxpayer dollars to that group each year.
Now, the city, their rejoinder is, well, those aren't the kinds of contractors we met. And my response is, well, we meant anybody you, the city, pay money to do things that's acting at cross purposes with what you're supposed to be doing.
So because the county has been handing out hundreds and thousands of tents and tarps since January 10th, before the severe weather declaration, does that potentially put the city in violation of your settlement?
It does, and it costs the taxpayers a lot of money.
To the tune of $16 million. That's roughly how much the city spends on removing many of those same tents and tarps each year. That removal system is something Mayor Keith Wilson wants to radically change. He wants to stop moving camps from street to street and get people into shelters and day centers instead. He says by this summer we should start seeing those changes. But that's not happening right now and hasn't been happening for years. Instead, the city has been stuck on this merry-go-round with the county over tent and tarp distribution.
The city is just on a treadmill cleaning up the mess that the county is leaving.
Mayor Wilson sent me the following statement today saying, "We need to change how we handle homelessness in Portland, and not just during severe winter weather. It's time to end the practice of handing out tents and tarps in Portland and redirect those funds and efforts to life-saving, cost-effective shelter." He went on, "I'll continue to regularly meet with Chair Vega-Peterson to coordinate ending unsheltered homelessness in our community. That partnership has already begun to show progress with the recent opening of 200 overnight beds." Now, I'll be honest, when I got that statement, I was surprised to hear that he wants to end the practice of handing out tents and tarps. This is the first time we're hearing Mayor Wilson take a stand that certainly appears to be in opposition to county efforts to address homelessness. A spokesperson for Multnomah County sent me the following statement, saying in part, quote, "There is agreement that as we increase shelter beds, the distribution of tents and tarps will decrease. That's why our top priority right now is increasing the number of shelter beds in our community." The Joint Office adopted a temporary tent and tarp policy for the winter months. She went on, emphasizing it was the humane decision then, and it remains the humane decision now as we navigate an ongoing weather crisis and work to increase our shelter beds. This policy will be revisited come April. Now, DiLorenzo is calling for the city to end its partnership with Multnomah County's Joint Office of Homeless Services. That almost happened last year when 3 out of the 4 city councilors at the time voted to move forward with breaking the homeless agreement with the county because they didn't know where their money was going exactly or what it was being spent on. However, that effort died when Mayor Keith Wilson won the election. The old commissioners said they would leave it up to the new council, and so far this year, Mayor Wilson directed the new council to continue the county partnership.
Well, if they divorce their partnership with the joint office, then the joint office is no longer one of their contractors, and then they're in compliance with the agreement. The other alternatives are to basically go after the county for the money that the county, through its actions, have cost the city by way of having to comply with this settlement agreement. Another option is to go ask the federal court for an order requiring the city to finance Mayor Wilson's request for indoor shelters so that people stay indoors and there's no reason to hand out tents and tarps and therefore no blockages on the sidewalks.
Mediation between DiLorenzo's team and the city of Portland begins tomorrow. The two sides will either reach an agreement on what to do or not to do moving forward, or they'll duke it out in federal court. The main point of controversy boils down to one word: contractor, and if the county, in fact, falls under that title as it relates to the city of Portland. Now, I just did a lot of talking, and we got way deep in the weeds on this whole city-county partnership and tent and tarp drama. And while it's certainly interesting, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what this is all about. People are dying on our streets for many reasons, whether that be drugs, cold weather, or violence. A man just died this past weekend in southwest Portland due to hypothermia, according to the medical examiner. And there is no one right way to address this crisis. Tents and tarps are just a piece of a much larger issue. Just take it from these two, who I met today on the streets.
Living on the streets is hard. We don't work, we don't have no money, but we gotta survive, you know?
It always changes. I mean, you think that you know how hard it's going to be. You think that it's bad, and then it gets worse.
All right, so what are your thoughts on tent and tarp distribution? Do you see it as an always or never issue, or is there a gray area, especially when it comes to severe weather? Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. All right, well, we're heading into another cold night, but Multnomah County and several others have closed warming shelters. They opened them last night because of the potential snow. And today, we learned hundreds of people went to get warm. In Multnomah County, 325 people went to severe weather shelters throughout the county last night. The county says that was higher than they initially planned, but they were able to add beds. 48 people stayed at the Cook Plaza shelter in southeast Portland, 62 at the Hollywood shelter in northeast, and 102 stayed at a shelter on Northwest 14th. Another 113 people spent the night at Salvation Army shelters. In Washington County, 63 people spent the night at 2 shelters, one in Beaverton and one in Hillsborough. Now, that homeless woman you just heard from, she told me she stayed at the Cook Plaza shelter in southeast Portland last night. She says she was given a tent and tarp and was in Old Town today looking for a place to set it up.
Actually, that's what I got right here. I went to, off of 194th and Stark, I went to a shelter there, which was fantastic. I want to give them big props for that. I got a tent, I got a tarp. There was all sorts of food resources there. They had mats there, they were very generous.
Now let's get to a question from a viewer about when the shelters open. We get some version of this every time there's severe weather. Charisse wrote to us last night. She says, I saw the newscast that shelters were opening due to the cold. They opened Monday in Washington County, Clark County, and others, but Multnomah County didn't open theirs. The news said that it didn't meet their threshold requirements. They did open one Tuesday, but it was almost as cold Monday night, so why wouldn't they have opened it Monday night? Well, I asked Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega-Peterson that question yesterday. She says the county has certain thresholds. Those are the ones you can see right there on your screen regarding temperatures and or snowfall. But they also base their decision on a medical perspective, like if they're seeing an uptick in EMS calls and emergency room visits.
You know, we were really watching closely about the thresholds. We know that there's been cold weather over the last couple of weeks that has a cumulative effects. We saw some of those numbers go up in terms of ambulance and emergency room visits, and we wanted to be responsive for that. The thresholds are reviewed about every 18 months, and we do that in partnership with the City of Portland. We do have different thresholds than our neighboring counties, but I will say that on an average night, we also have about 3,200 shelter beds that are open throughout Multnomah County. If you look at Washington County, they have about 400. If you look at Clackamas County, they have about 200. So on a regular basis, we have more options open.
Multnomah County closed the severe weather shelters today at noon. Beds are still available tonight at the year-round shelters. Now, last summer, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled cities are allowed to make their own ordinances to restrict homeless camping and punish people who violate those ordinances with things like fines or jail time. Their ruling centered around a case out of Grants Pass, Oregon, where homeless people challenged a city ordinance that restricted where people are allowed to camp. Since then, Grants Pass has in fact made new rules around camping. They set up sanctioned campsites and had homeless people move in, and then after a few weeks started shutting them down. Well, this week, a judge decided they needed to pause those shutdowns. Here's the background. In August, the City Council unanimously voted on a resolution to establish several city-sanctioned campsites around town, banning camping everywhere else in the city. The mayor at the time said the campsites would be temporary while the city works on building a shelter. But the city started to close several of the sites last fall, just about 2 months after opening them. Also last fall, voters elected new city council members and a new mayor. The new mayor, Clint Scherf, said it was not the city's responsibility to build a homeless shelter. And last month, the council voted to close the larger of the 2 remaining campsites on J Street in Grants Pass. So the organization Disability Rights Oregon filed a lawsuit. Here's their deputy legal director, Tom Stenson.
But as the city moved on, they shrank that list down from 8 different places to 5 places to 4 places to 2 places. And then just a week and a half ago, in the middle of winter, in the middle of some of the worst weather in Grants Pass, they decided to shrink it down to 1 place. And it was this small lot that was a 1/4 acre in size. And the city knew that there were hundreds of people who were camping in the 2 different campsites that were open at that time. And that there was no way that you were going to have 300 people suddenly move into this very small campsite.
Disability Rights Oregon claims closing down the J Street campsite violates a state law that we've covered extensively on this show. That's House Bill 3115. It says that cities must be, quote, objectively reasonable when it comes to time, place, and manner restrictions, basically rules around homelessness. Stenson says not having enough space for everyone who needs it is not reasonable.
I think the point was not, that Grants Pass was under some misunderstanding that this tiny plot of land was adequate to hold everybody. The fact that it was inadequate was the point. Grants Pass wanted people to say, it's cold, I'm miserable, I'm going to move to Medford, or I'm going to move to Roseburg, or I'm going to take a bus to Portland, or they were just trying to make homelessness somebody else's problem.
A judge granted a temporary restraining order on the closure of the J Street camp, pausing the closure for 2 weeks. In the meantime, the city cannot issue fines or arrest people camping there. Disability Rights says if the city continues to try and close the camp, they'll pursue an injunction to pause the camp's closure longer while the lawsuit plays out. We reached out to the mayor of Grants Pass and the city council. Only one councilor responded, saying she didn't know enough to comment. The city manager sent us a statement saying this is an important issue and we are actively reviewing all aspects to ensure we make the best decisions for our community. We will share updates as soon as we can. Well, tonight we're continuing our Still Searching series by looking at a cold case in Clark County. For more than 50 years, detectives have been investigating who killed an 18-year-old named Carol Valenzuela. Now, they think they know who is responsible. Thomas Schultz has the story.
She was like that sunny, warm spring day. Everybody loved to be around her.
More than 50 years after Carol Valenzuela's death, her brother-in-law Larry Helledge has no trouble remembering what made her unique.
Everybody just loved her. She was always happy.
Helledge says Valenzuela was originally from Minnesota. She married his brother Robert, moved to Oregon, and had twin girls.
Man, she just fit right in. She was like she was always there. And she felt interested in me. Like she really deeply cared and wanted to see me succeed.
So on August 2nd, 1974, detectives say Carol had an argument with her husband. She walked out the door and hitched a ride. It was the last time her family saw her alive.
She was supposed to go to a friend's house, I believe, and didn't show up.
Helledge says his brother called police that night, though it took authorities 2 months to find Carol's body. She had been killed, her body dumped.
On October 12th, we discovered the remains of Carol Valenzuela up in Dole Valley.
Investigator Doug Mass with the Clark County Sheriff's Office started working the case 50 years ago and is still trying to get justice for Carol's family today.
I've lived this case for just about my whole life.
He's focused on one key piece of evidence, the fact Carol's body was discovered nearby another murdered woman, 17-year-old Martha Morrison. Detectives believe, like Carol, Morrison was hitchhiking when she was assaulted and killed.
Over a number of years, the bodies started showing up around Clark County.
Eventually, detectives narrowed in on a suspect named Warren Forrest, who worked for the Clark County Parks Department.
He had access to some very remote areas, and ultimately it was his demise.
In the early 70s, Mass believes Forrest may have killed at least 7 women. For years, he was never linked to the crimes.
No leads whatsoever.
But in October 1974, shortly after Carol's death, that started to change.
It kind of hit us between the eyes that they're all related.
When Mass says a hitchhiking woman caught a ride with Forrest. Instead of driving to her destination, Forrest took her to Lacamas Lake Park.
She was picked up and kidnapped, sexually assaulted, stabbed, and buried and left for dead. And she actually miraculously survived, crawled out of the grave, crawled almost a mile out to the public road. A couple of people picked her up. She was taken to the hospital, and that's where I connected with her as a patrol deputy at that time.
That woman identified Warren Forrest as the man who kidnapped her.
It was really the thing that sparked this whole series of cases.
Hours later, he was arrested. Over the years, Forrest was convicted for killing 2 women, including Martha Morrison in 2023, the woman found buried next to Carol.
I guess there's no delicate way to put it. He's just one of the most stone-cold sociopathic personalities.
Now, 50 years after Carol's death, detectives say they're close to charging Forrest for that crime.
I think we've got enough to charge now.
Though they're waiting on DNA evidence to come back from a lab, which could make the case even stronger.
We're not talking days, not weeks, but we're not talking years either.
Hopefully this will end soon.
Forrest is serving his sentence in Airway Heights Correction Center outside Spokane. He rejected our interview request. And while Helledge says a conviction won't heal the pain,
I didn't just lose a sister. I lost a family.
it could help mend families.
And it's time. It's just time. It's time to end this.
Thomas Schultz joins me now. Thomas, you mentioned DNA evidence being tested. What exactly is in the lab right now?
Yeah, well, Blair, there's dozens of hairs that were found in Forrest's van. Detectives believe they could be linked to women who disappeared decades ago. They believe Forrest killed several women, possibly more than a dozen. Now, once they get lab results back, they'll have a clearer understanding of how many victims Forrest is directly tied to, though at this point it looks like those lab results will come back in the next few months.
And the detective says they believe they have enough to charge Forrest now on Valenzuela's death. Why haven't they?
Well, investigator Doug Mass says they're trying to determine if it's worth the public expense. Forrest is being held in prison for 2 murder convictions and is going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But they think if they convict Forrest on Valenzuela's death, maybe he'll come clean on other women found dead in the 1970s. Again, Warren Forrest refused to speak to us when we asked about all of these accusations.
All right, Thomas Schultz in the newsroom. Thank you. Well, if there's a cold case in your community that you'd like Thomas and team to look into, let us know by sending an email. The address is right there on your screen. Still searching at kgw.com. We're back right after this. Now to a follow-up in a KGW investigation into the downfall of Sherry's Cafe. The Oregon Lottery sent Sherry's to collections because the company owes the state more than $900,000. The debt will only continue to grow if bills aren't paid. The company will be charged 9% interest each month going forward. Here's investigative reporter Kyla Boshi with the details.
When Sherry's restaurants abruptly closed all Oregon locations in October, many longtime customers and employees figured it was the final chapter. The Beaverton-based chain, known for award-winning pies and late-night meals, faced growing money troubles.
We've been in hospice for months, and it was just dragged out to the very end.
But months later, the Sherry's saga continues, even though the restaurants sit empty. This week, the Oregon Lottery sent Sherry's to collections at the Oregon Department of Revenue. Sherry's owes the state more than $900,000, and 9% interest will be tacked on every month going forward. Before it closed, Sherry's was one of the largest video lottery retailers in the state with 42 locations. A lottery spokesperson said the company has gone silent. Sherry's management has also failed to respond to more than 24 lawsuits. Former landlords and contractors are owed millions of dollars. In January, Sherry's management filed its annual report with the Oregon Secretary of State. The company's president, Sam Borghese, didn't respond to our request for comment, and the listed business address has long been abandoned. Based on federal records, it does not appear that Sherry's or its parent company have filed for bankruptcy. Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. In the meantime, have a great night, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.